Contracts are very complex and opaque things. We only ever see small snippets of them or only ever get the headline parts of it. Case study, Hamilton's recent Ferrari contract. We know how long it's for, how much he's going to earn, roughly, and only a smattering of other bits and pieces. Gone are the days when Jackie Stewart and Ken Tyrrell did their contracts on nothing more than a gentleman's handshake. Some contracts might have been quickly drummed up on a napkin in the local pub, which actually happened somewhere. I can't recall who and what, but it's actually happened, whether it was in Formula 1 or music. But today's Formula 1 contracts are going to be incredibly in-depth, and lawyers and agents are going to earn their money and then some out of them. But sometimes a contract dispute can be incredibly complex when it comes to who is the actual owner of a driver or a player in the case of some other sports. The Oscar Piastri fiasco of a couple of years ago when McLaren and Renault couldn't figure out who actually owned him, and the free transfer rule in football exists because once a player is out of contract, nobody owns that player, so they can move to another club for no fee as a result. But in 2005, a Formula 1 driver was briefly owned by two people at the same time, and it got very expensive for one party involved. This is the story of how Jenson Button ended up being owned by BAR and Williams. Now, JB had been given his breakthrough with Williams in 2000. Frank had plucked him out of Formula 3 and given the then 19-year-old his opportunity. Fresh-faced Button was supported by the British public, but at the same time he wasn't being hailed as the next big thing, because he was at a Williams team in a rebuilding phase, and David Coulthard was our main British driver at that time, given he was driving for McLaren that was very much capable of winning a championship, and his teammate Mika Hakkinen had won the title the previous year. But Jenson was in the seat for another reason, again involving some complexities involving drivers and their contracts. Alex Zanardi had been sent to Williams by Chip Ganassi in IndyCar in exchange for Juan Pablo Montoya, and after such a horrendous 1999 season in which he didn't score a single point, Zanardi had gone back to America a year early, while Montoya was finishing out his contract over there and also defending his kart title. So Williams had a free seat that, in this instance, they'd given to Jenson. And Jenson finished a respectable 8th in the standings in his first year in the sport, 12 points and a best result of 4th under the first 6 get point system, so not bad for a rookie year, with 2 points coming at his home Grand Prix at Silverstone. Under the current system, there's an extra 3 point scoring positions on the table. At the end of the year, Button moved on to Benetton. He was farmed out there by Frank because he was on a 3-year deal and Frank needed to get the most out of him. There was also an option for an extra 2 years if they wanted it, so he was under contract for 3 years, but could be 5 years. And apparently several teams were wanting to buy out the contract for rumoured £30 million, but Frank didn't bite on any of those offers. Needless to say, Jenson did not have fun at Benetton. Not only was the car a dog, he was also outperformed by Giancarlo Fisichella more often than not. On top of this, he wasn't particularly liked by Flavio Briatore. At the time, Flavio had most of his boys in that team, especially as it transitioned to becoming Renault in 2002. Fisichella, Trulli, Alonso and Webber were all there at one point with Jenson, and they were all managed or otherwise friends with Flavio. Button wasn't one of Flavio's boys, and he said in his book that if Flavio liked you, he liked you. If he didn't, well, he didn't. And Button had already upset Benetton by announcing his move to the team on his own personal website instead of letting Benetton do it first. Briatore went as far as to hint that Jenson might not see out his 2 years at the team. He accused Jenson of being a lazy playboy and suggested that he either show up super good or leave Formula 1 entirely. With Alonso being snapped up for 2003 and his Williams contract expiring, Button was off to another team. His first season at BAR was his best season yet in terms of points hauls, but he was still 9th in the standings. A massive crash at Monaco knocked that season back a tiny bit and was forced to miss out as he had a mega shunt coming out of the tunnel, whereupon he was taken away to hospital and forced to sit out the Monaco Grand Prix. He also demolished his world champion teammate Villeneuve, who in the early part of their partnership said he looked like something out of a boy band because he was too good looking to be a Formula 1 driver. At the first race of the season, JV had come into the pits a lap later than he should have done and claimed that it was radio issues that were the cause of this, so he'd come in, done the pit stop, and Jenson had to double stack with him. But Jenson and Dave Richards, who was the team manager at the time, don't believe that story at all. But in 2004, Button had a car that was the best he'd had since coming onto the F1 scene in 2000. He took his first podium in Malaysia and then grabbed his first pole at Imola, beating the overpowered Ferrari to that position, where he then finished the race in second. The BAR of that year was fast and was a regular visitor to the podium, 10 times in 18 races, and BAR would finish the season second overall, ahead of Ferrari's usual challengers McLaren and Williams, who both had absolute howlers. This was the year of Williams having their walrus nose thing and McLaren having the very fragile MP419. So BAR was going about things thinking, we've got a really good car, so maybe 2005 we might be able to win a couple of races. A few years down the line, maybe a championship. But during 2004, Jenson said, I'm going back to Williams. This caused a bit of a kerfuffle with BAR. Dave Richards was quick to point out that Jenson had an optional extra year clause on his contract that he wanted to activate, and claimed that he'd not been able to speak to JB about it. Because he'd not had the time to talk about that, he claimed that Frank's contract was void and should be ripped up immediately, or at least be withdrawn until he'd had the opportunity to speak to Jenson about staying on, and only if Jenson said no, could he then go to Williams. According to the Bring Back V10 podcast, which I never listen to, I only see the quotes extracted from it posted elsewhere because I want to do all of this without just parroting what they've said, that chat about extending the contract had to be done by the 31st of July, so ideally the weekend of the German Grand Prix. Button's manager had been given all the pertinent details on the 27th, so in BAR's mind, legally they'd done all they'd had to and Button was staying, and they had the receipts to prove it. I'm sure the Bring Back V10 podcast is brilliant because they get people who were there at the time to talk about stuff, but like I say, I don't listen to it because I don't want to just copy what they've done. Peter Brook and I don't watch each other's videos for that exact same reason, something that we talked about, well last week, actually. And I actually hang out more with sim racers than I do other people that do this. Bit weird, I know, but it is what it is. Apparently, JB had been asking about engine supply as well, which had sounded a bit iffy, and Richards had said that this was giving them a sniff that he'd be looking elsewhere. Honda had committed until at least the end of 2007, so everything seemed to be all okay within the team and keeping its number one driver. 5 days later, Williams had signed Button for 2005, saying that they'd been told that the option had not been taken up. The reasoning was that Jenson was sniffing about at Williams because the BMW deal that Williams had with them was a bit more locked in than Honda's was with BAR. Honda was just an engine supplier at that point, while BMW and Williams were a full-on partnership with better facilities. Button said that he was just thinking of himself and thinking of how he could get into the best position possible to become a world champion. And actually, just as a note from Editing Aiden, hi, how you doing? For the most part, it is, to quote Limp Bizkit, all about the he said, she said. Like I've already mentioned, it seems that this one side was acting under the impression that the other side had failed to reach a suitable conclusion to the contract talks. But elsewhere on the internet, it seems like a bit of power playing on behalf of Jenson's management, which, in his book, and I looked at the book first to get the ins and outs, well, we'll get to all of that in a bit. And that book is also from my old, musty, moisture-filled, mouldy flat, which, as you can probably see, has set the old allergies off. But hanging on to these books is cheaper than replacing them, so yeah, a little. So with Button's management claiming that BAR hadn't spoken to them about the contract extension, and Williams being under the impression that Button hadn't taken up this contract extension, and then BAR saying, well, we did speak to the management about this, and now you've gone and signed a contract with somebody else, they had to take the whole thing to the FIA's contract recognition board. This is what Oscar Piastri had to go through when all that stuff started about his contract with Renault and McLaren. From what I gather, trying to dig deeper into how all this works, is that it's an international panel of 3 highly rated contract lawyers. These then go over every single piece of a contract to see if there are any breaches or any holes in it, which can determine if any contract is still valid or not. In Jenson's case, it was determining whether BAR had exercised that contract extension clause and informed Button's management about it before his management went to Williams instead. BAR was claiming that the fact that Honda had locked in their engine supply until at least 2007 was enough to guarantee Button's services for 2005. Meanwhile, Button's management was claiming that there was a loophole that could be used to make that not legally binding and allow them to go on towards Williams. Nevertheless, the CRB found in favour of British American racing and Button was still signed up for 2005. Following this, he dumped his management team and later admitted that he was wrong to not deal with the matter with the team in person. But it was to get a tiny bit more confusing. Button and his new management went back to Williams, or Williams went back to them, with an offer to drive for the team in 2006 instead. But there was also going to be a big switch in the dynamic of the two teams. Honda had bought into BAR, so it would become the Honda team for 2006, while Williams was losing the BMW partnership as they were going to join it with Sauber instead. Something that Jenson didn't find out about until after he'd signed the pre-contract with Williams. So during 2004, he had a management team trying to get him out of a BAR contract, and now he's got a team trying to get him out of a Williams contract. Yeah, I'm guessing this was not a fun time for him. 2005 was a season where Button had to miss a couple of races due to BAR being banned due to the dodgy second fuel tank they'd been running, a video I've done in the past. BAR had also seen the rules changed as part of a rule they were exploiting, where it said that engines had to last 2 successive races before they could be changed, this being part of Max's new cost-saving exercises. But BAR had found a loophole whereby if they were running outside of the points, they could park the cars and call it a retirement, and then get a free engine change for the following Grand Prix. They did this at Australia to take advantage of a fresher engine being easier to cool in Malaysia. Charlie Whiting, being Charlie Whiting, saw what they were doing immediately and closed that loophole, and then it all kicked off at the San Marino Grand Prix regarding that iffy tank that they were using. But following the chaos of the US Grand Prix in 2005, Button's year got better. He finished every race in the points and BAR was 6th overall. Staying with BAR, now going to be Honda for the following year, was going to be a much better option than going to Williams that wasn't going to have support from BMW. He needed out of that contract and needed out soon. Imagine Hamilton doing the same thing if Mercedes flukes its way to being the fastest car later this year. But Frank being Frank, he had that piece of paper and said, "Sorry gents, but you've signed a contract with me, there's nothing you can do." Well, there is. You can buy out a contract if you have to, but in JB's case it was going to cost him a rumoured £18 million. Like I said, he'd gone from a contract with them he wanted to keep locked in, to signing another that he wanted out. £18 million later, he was free from the Williams contract and signed another deal with Honda, which, when you think about it, worked out for the best. At the 2006 Hungarian Grand Prix, Jenson finally won his first Grand Prix, and Honda went on to finish 4th in the championship with 86 points. Williams, now with Cosworth engines, finished 8th with just 11, and had a lot of purple for retirements on their stat sheet. Honda also destroyed their Japanese rivals Toyota, who were spending a lot more money and chopping and changing personnel on a yearly basis, so that would have been of great satisfaction for them. Alright, the next 2 years, not so great. In Button's words, they were shit. Their 2007 car was a dog that could only muster 6 points all season, and then in 2008 they scored 14 points, with Barrichello's podium at Silverstone being the only saving grace. Then, Honda pulled out and left just a shell of a team with Ross Brawn in charge, which, as we later discovered, would win the World Championship. So in the end, it worked out alright for Jenson. He became a world champion after years of being called a journeyman and someone who was never good enough to take the ultimate prize. Had he gone to Williams, he'd probably have never won the championship, as Williams was sliding further and further back down the grid. 18 million quid to win the championship a few years later? Yeah, I'd say that's worth it. So it's not surprising then that this part of his career is merely glossed over in his book. He gives a very cut down and simple take on it all, and like already mentioned, admits that he was misled and that his management was looking out for itself rather than its client. No, really, he sums the whole thing up in less than like 100 words. It starts off by saying, like, little did we know BMW was pulling out the sport, blah blah blah. He does say, I would go into all the nitty gritty, but you'd switch off, so I won't. The upshot was that BAR kicked up a fuss, the engine issues became a real problem, I changed managers, there was a court case. The judge decided I'd have to stay with BAR for another year. The whole thing is summed up in... Well, I mean, that bit is summed up in 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. The whole story, including 2006, less than half a page. But, I mean, he did say he wasn't going to bore us, but... Yeah, the whole thing in his book took way less time to explain than I've just done in this entire video. But this is the thing about contracts, isn't it? They can keep you prisoner if you don't read the small print, and if you don't know what you're doing with them. Like I said, really complex and opaque. So then a look at Jenson Button's contract disputes through 2005 and 2006. If this has been an educational look through the motorsport history books, then do like this video so I know I've done a good job. And for more tales of days gone by, subscribe to this channel with the bell on so you never miss out on anything I do here. 2k left to go until 100k. Let's get it done. A massive thanks as ever to the fine bunch of lads over at Patreon, and if you want to help support me at a more personal level, then a link to Patreon is in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, and other bits and pieces that you might need to know. Well, there's super thanks and memberships if they float your boat. So until next time, I've been Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.